and I am recording this for future posterity for anyone who'd like to see it later. I'm delighted. This is our second in this KGI Stay Tuned summer series, which is exclusively for alumni. We had last week or 2 weeks ago, I think it was, a woman from Celgene who does corporate legal counsel. It was interesting. And Ben is so gracious to be our second speaker. And then we'll have another one coming up in a few weeks' time. So stay, abreast of our KGI Alumni Facebook page, and you'll know the latest. I try not to bombard you too often with emails. I know I do sometimes, but we have a lot of programming, which makes me really happy, and I'm delighted to see so many of you here today. So without further ado, I think most of you know Ben, so I don't think he needs a big introduction. I sent you his bio yesterday, but he's really working on some really interesting drug repurposement items, and I've learned a lot from just my few conversations with him. So without further ado, take it away, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today, and for everybody for showing up. And hopefully I can speak about interesting things and be somewhat entertaining here. So what I'm going to talk about today is new biopharmaceutical product conception and early stages. And it's subtitled A Day in the Life of an Academic Engineer. So I guess I'll give a little background about myself. I was, as you know, a student at KGI, and I graduated in 2009. And at that point, I decided I wanted to work in the lab and engineer new products, and I decided to pursue a Ph.D. And so I left California and moved to Lincoln, Nebraska, and it's definitely a change of pace, and but I think it was much for the better. I was able to focus a lot on my dissertation work and sort of the academic side of science. So through that process and studying chemical engineering, chemical and biomolecular engineering, I have been working on a product for what we are calling for pain at this point. It is a platform technology, and so that we do have some leeway to pivot into different marketplaces, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But basically, right now we're looking at a technology to relieve pain, and I also want to preface to say by saying, please interrupt me at any time. Ask questions. That'd be great. I appreciate that. It really will help move this along, I think, and I can talk more about what you guys are interested in. And the way I have it structured right now is sort of an overview, but I can delve more into particular aspects. So just I guess you can ask questions in the chat or just interrupt me through voice. It doesn't really matter. Okay. So the company that we started here at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln is called Neurocarrus, and this is basically a classic university spin out. I'm working with my advisor, Dr. Paul Blum, and he and I basically are working on the technology with the tech transfer office in order to obtain the exclusive licensing and everything that you would need to do a successful university startup from what's called New Tech Ventures. And that's basically the lowdown. Here's what I'm going to talk about today. A lot about conception and development of new products, sort of the concept of a lean startup, which is necessary coming out of the university. especially also in a place in the country that is not a major biotech hub. Exit strategies of these types of companies, how to incorporate what type of company you might want to choose, various grants, mostly I'll talk about SBIR and STTR grants, and as well as a business model and a way of structuring a business model that is also lean. I'll talk about research and development and building websites, intellectual property. I'll touch briefly on incubators, and then if you have any questions, I'll take them at the end or at any time, as I said. All right, so I talked a bit about my education already, and I don't need to talk about that more. My research interests are protein, structured function relationships, engineering, fusion proteins in particular, and engineering these proteins for drug delivery applications. I'm also interested in the cell biology and molecular biology of toxins and cells that are intoxicated as well, and the various mechanisms of action that can occur. I'm on LinkedIn and ResearchGate, and you can connect with me there. Okay, so the concept that I want to bring up first is the concept of the lean startup. If you guys have ever heard of, has anyone ever heard of Steve Blank before? I've been just watching a lot of his videos, and he has a lot of information online about, and I'm constantly learning from him, so I recommend that. And I'll have a couple more recommendations as well for anybody who's going through this process in terms of information or where you can get it, references and such. But basically, the concept of the lean startup, as it says over there on the left, really favors experimentation and going out into the field and meeting your customers and understanding what your customers need and what they want. Because a lot of times, if you design a business from your desk, you can really miss the mark there. I remember there was a anecdote that Steve Blank was talking about where there were some students from, I believe, Stanford, and they were trying to design this autonomous robotic, basically a lawn care system, so that this robot would go around and be like a Roomba for your lawn. And they went out and talked to, they did their whole business plan, went out and finally talked to their customers and found out that there really wasn't a demand for that. By talking to their customers, they were able to find out that there was a real need for a robot to spray pesticides and herbicides for agricultural needs. And then from that information, they're able to go out and build a multi-million-dollar company. So that's sort of the gist of what this is all about, is the understanding your customers is sort of number one. And in these biotech startups, there's sort of two groups of customers that you can think about. One of them is the end users, who are the people that are going to use whatever your pharmaceutical product is. Unfortunately, you're probably not going to really get to that stage as an early seed stage developer of the company. So you have to think a lot more about who your customers are in terms of your direct product and actually in your exit strategy. So a lot of times your customers will actually be large pharmaceutical companies that are interested in your technology and licensing or acquiring you. And what are their needs? What are their values? And talking to them can be very informational as well. Probably, if not more useful than, say, speaking to the patients that may or may not receive the drug, 10 years down the line. So this concept of the lean startup definitely favors you going out into the field and doing your homework and not spending all your time writing a really exhaustive business plan. So here's a little, not animation, but a little graphic. So you see the little mouse here in the boat, and I lost some videos. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So here we go. Here we got the mouse in the boat. This is you and your idea, and you're trying to set sails for financial and scientific glory. And unfortunately, what you find out, or as Mike Tyson said, like, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth, and you basically, you realize that what you have isn't as feasible as you think it is, or there actually isn't such value out there to be captured. Your next try, same thing might happen again, but eventually, through this reiteration, you're able to figure out where to go in order to capture the value using a feasible plan. And platform technologies really do favor this type of reiteration in terms of being able to pivot from one market to another in order to basically, you want to get to the market as quickly as possible with whatever minimum type of product you can get out there. And that's I would say go to steveblank.com and you'll see a lot more about that. So Neurocarrus, I just want to touch briefly about that, and or about our product. And it's a drug delivery technology that basically is working within the pain market. And what I'm trying to convince here, this is just a cutout from our website, but basically I'm trying to convince everybody that this is something that will have an imminent future value. And I think that the $635 billion disease burden, that's like healthcare costs and lost wages and productivity to 100 million Americans. And that's really something that is still an issue. And as you can see in the media, there's all kinds of opiate addiction and death that is occurring with the current drugs in the market. The pharmaceutical pain drug market is it's over 30 billion, and I'd say half of it are NSAIDs and opiates, and then about another quarter or more is like off-label use of anticonvulsants and anti-epileptics, and then there are some other newer drugs that are coming out that are more specific for certain types of pain. But it's sort of this big, huge market that it hasn't really had a lot of new entrants recently, but there are a number of drugs that are going to be coming out for pain indications. So it's sort of a developing market. The other thing about it is that there are a lot of drugs that are going to be generic soon too, like OxyContin. Anyway, so this is a plug for the company, but I wanted to convince everybody that pain is a huge problem. The next thing is what you're trying to do feasible, and how do you know if what you're doing is feasible when you take a look in the mirror? Are you really seeing what you think you're seeing? And so the way you can sort of assess the feasibility of what your concept is to develop, say, like peer-reviewed research, patents, and you want to have a theoretical framework that makes sense. This on the right is basically what our drug product is built on. There's a everybody knows what Botox is, I believe here. This is not Botox, but it is based on a bacterial toxin that is much different than Botox in terms of how it operates and how it delivers drugs into a cell. And so what we've done is basically retargeted it using using the neurotoxin binding domain. But what it is a platform that allows you to deliver all types of different molecules. It's much more flexible in that way, and it's very stable. So is it feasible? Well, you have research, you do your in vitro type of work, usually to get to some sort of a pharmaceutical company who is your eventual customer. You're going to need some animal work, and that's basically the stage that we're at. And that's what we're working on right now. So as I said, peer-reviewed research, patents, and other successful products within the industry. So I mentioned Botox. That's what I mean by that is it's a bacterial toxin that has been very successful. And so all those things help you to sort of convince yourself that what you're doing is somewhat doable. The next thing is you want to have a practical exit strategy. And there, I sort of mentioned before, there are two main ones that you're really probably going to focus on here, which are licensing or sub-licensing and acquisition. If you decide which way you're going, it'll make a lot of the decisions for you. For example, we believe that we want to do more licensing with our technology, or sub-licensing, and in doing so, we decided that we could function as an LLC instead of a C corp, and I'll talk about that when I talk about incorporation. But basically, you've got you've got a company that is more structured around one aspect versus another. A C corp is more attractive to investors in a number of ways. On the right here, we've got just examples of some of these licensing deals. I believe this is in 2015, and you've got your small startups on the left, and then your big pharmas in the next column, and then the stage that they did their particular licensing deal. And a lot of these are in the technology stage, which is before that preclinical stage, but it's all variable. It all depends on what stage your technology is at and what kind of data you have to offer your potential large pharmaceutical customers. And so that as an exit strategy is used by many companies. And by exit, I mean your personal exit. I mean your company will still be there. But once if you've signed away all of your technology, there's not much else you can do but develop new IP. Okay. And any questions? Okay. So now I'll talk about a little bit about intellectual property, and if licensing is your exit strategy, or sub-licensing, meaning you're going to acquire a license from, let's say you're working at a university like we are. You're going to acquire a license from the university to the technology, and then you're going to sub-license that to a large pharmaceutical company for early stage, like say preclinical or maybe phase 1 or phase 2 drug development. And the quality of this agreement is, this is basically your product. You need to make sure that this is attractive to a pharmaceutical company in terms of like what are the terms. And there are a lot of places where your terms could be positive or negative for the company that you're trying to sell this to. We're talking about royalties, I guess, and royalties, milestone payments, upfront payments, things like that, which would have to be paid to the university or paid to the company. There's a lot of clauses about infringement. What if somebody infringes on that, on your intellectual property? Who is responsible for doing the suing, basically? There are, I would say, if you're interested in this, there's a template on Carnegie Mellon University's tech transfer website, and that's free. It's sort of has a software sort of spin to it, but it's definitely relevant, and you can get some idea of what some of the common terms are. But usually in these licensing deals, well, let's say with university, you're going to have to give up a certain percentage of your equity, say 5% or 6% to the university, and I think usually the royalties, you're looking to like 1 to 5%. It all depends on the university and what, I mean, because they are the ones who own the patent, and so you really have to work with them and negotiate. Sometimes they have the right to market the technology before they license it to you. So what you can do is ask to enter a standstill agreement with them, and the standstill agreement will allow you to postpone the marketing of the technology until you've negotiated for the license, and that can be useful if you're really going after the company, or starting a company. Any questions about this? Oh, the other thing is you also want to make sure your license is an investable license, meaning you can, if you have additional IP that is related to the intellectual property from the license that are somewhat could be considered derivatives or other types of related technologies, you need to have an agreement or clauses in your license agreement which can basically say whether the university or you have rights to them. And so I would say if you're in a licensing agreement or negotiation with the university, make sure that you that you do hire a lawyer, and because this is really going to sort of set the tone for your future dealings with your sub-licensees. Okay, in incorporation, there's a number of different business structures, and I touched upon the LLC and the C Corp, which I think are the most used structures for these biotech startups. The LLC Well, I'll just say I'll just talk about LLC versus C corp. Um, LLC and C corp use basically they use a different set of terms for things like um, ownership shares or membership percentage. If you're talking about equity in the company, or um, an LLC will have an operating agreement versus an article of incorporation for C corp. But a lot of these things are referring to very similar aspects of the business. But it is important to understand the differences in the terminology. So, as I said also before, a C corp is a lot of times more attractive to an investor because it has the the share structure, whereas the LLC has the membership structure. And when you're doing your different rounds of financing, your Series A, B, C, and all of that, it's sort of it's mostly investors understand the C corp structure, and that's sort of what they use. The LLC is attractive though because you have what's called pass-through taxation, and meaning that the LLC will be taxed on the LLC. Well, basically the taxes will pass through to you if you are earning money off of your LLC. A C corp will be taxed twice. The corporation will be taxed once, and then the individual will be taxed another time when they get paid. So that's a consideration to have. You can save money on taxes. That's great. And a lot of new biotechs that are LLCs are structured to be intellectual property delivery mechanisms, basically. And there's less reporting as well in LLCs. I think federal, and then sometimes state reporting. So it's you got to consider what your exit strategy is going to be, and that can help you decide which sort of company you want to be. All this sort of culminates, say on the right hand side here, these the numbered section. In order to submit grants and interact with the federal government and everything, you basically need your employer identification number and a bank account. If you're an LLC, you can have an operating agreement. An operating agreement is basically it's a document that outlines the relationship or the financial relationship between the founders. This is similar to an article of incorporation, although articles of incorporation are required for a C corp. The other things you would need are anything that's specific to the state that you're incorporating in. A lot of companies will incorporate in Delaware because there's a lot of legal precedent that's accumulated there. We incorporated in the state of Nebraska because the state of Nebraska has a lot of economic advantages that you can take a part of. So there's what's called the Nebraska Business Development Center, and they will match any of your SBIR grants. So if you get a $150,000 SBIR grant, they will match up to $100,000. So your $150,000 becomes $250,000, and so that's one of the major incentives of incorporating in state here. That you should also make sure, or if you're in another state, look to see what sort of advantages you might have if there are. business development, government functions that you can contact. I strongly recommend doing that. And then the other thing you need for grants are registrations, Fastlane, GrantsGov, SBA or Small Business Association, ERA Commons, and SAM Systems of Award Management. Those are all going to be required, and that can take up to like 3 months in order to get that all. So if you're going to apply for a grant, start on that stuff early. And fortunately, we were okay with that. We got our grants in. It's not something you want to worry about though. Websites. A website, as everybody knows, is sort of your point of contact with your customer or anybody who is trying to vet you, and make sure that your business is legitimate. Even though it does, what makes your business legitimate is all those government registrations and everything. This is really what people will make contact with, and it has a lot to do with how they perceive you. And so what we did was I met somebody who did our whole website for he did it for about $300, which is I think very cheap when it comes to getting set up as $200 to $300 for their time. And then we had to buy some stock photos and some hosting services. So on the left hand side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Those are all web hosters. Those are sort of like some of the most popular ones. We used GoDaddy because we had already had some websites with them. And let's see. Then I recommend doing a WordPress template for your website, just because it's fast and easy and looks slick and modern. And your alternative is to do HTML, and that'll probably be harder for you to update once it gets up and rolling. And I just recommend getting one of these, and they're not expensive. I use what's called Theme Forest, and Theme Forest has new templates all the time, so don't worry about somebody else having the same template because it'll look different anyways. And stock photos, get a lot of stock photos for your website. I'll show you what we have. So we've got like a loading icon. This is part of the theme. There's a top slider. So like a lot. I don't know. Some of my time is spent just sort of nitpicking this website, and that's sort of something you have to do if I guess if you hire somebody else to do it. You may want to do it yourself, but I think a lot of the times you don't have time for this, so I recommend hiring somebody. But basically, you've got your slider on top. This is a stock photo that we bought. This background is actually a picture of our lab. These icons, these are our regular icons that you can just get easily on. You can just download them online. They make it look professional. This is all part of the template. Stock photo. More stock photos. So you have links to your research articles. Here we are, and some of our links. And so this is still in progress, but I think it was a pretty good price for what we got. And it's still work in progress. If anybody has any suggestions, please feel free. Okay. Where am I at? Okay. All right. Small business grants. Basically, SBIR and STTR, they're Small Business Innovative Research Grants, and there are a number of different phases. If you talk about Army or Department of Defense, I believe they have a phase 4, what they call phase 4, which is like a commercialization phase. But let's just say there's 3 phases for the purposes of this. Phase 1 is really what you're going for. It's $100 to $150,000 over 6 months, and this is sort of your major entry. This gives you like if you have a major government agency that vets you and has given you the money, it's a lot easier to acquire or to get investors or to be acquired. The major agencies that participate are DoD, Health and Human Services, NASA, NSF, DOE. Most of that is the Department of Defense. We've submitted for NIH and NSF, and we're waiting to hear back about that. And I took a webinar, and this SBI or STTR webinar, I highly recommend it. It's this CIT, and here's the link down here. And if anybody wants, we can go into that in more detail. There's like a lot of working parts to these grants, and you basically have to outline everything that you're planning on doing in your project and who's going to work on it, where the work's going to be done, how much is it going to cost. And another thing that is really great or to have in your small business grant is when if you're doing this lean startup philosophy to go out and talk to your customers and get letters of support from them, because if you basically have a pharmaceutical company saying I'm going to, or if this research works out, I'm going to work on sub-licensing it, then the funding agency will see the immediate value, and they won't have any doubts about that. And also getting letters of support, say from doctors or hospitals or people who run hospitals, basically saying that the product that you are developing would be of great use, and immediately they would buy. If it were available, those help as well. But as I was saying about the lean startup, those are key pieces to have, and if you have those, the rest kind of follows. Another thing that you're probably going to have to do, we put together a number of these quad charts for program directors or program managers, and what these quad charts are a way of conveying your technology and the market, the need, the team, and the stage of development that you're at to somebody who could potentially fund it for you. And so these are kind of fun to put together, because it's not like you're putting together a 15-page grant proposal, but it's a very condensed way of conveying everything and coming up with the most important aspects of what you're trying to do. So if you have an idea, I recommend doing a quad chart. The other thing is a business model canvas, and I'll show that in a second. Then briefly, if you land your money, or even if you need money, you can go to an incubator, and there are incubators all over the place. They're springing up as we speak, and there are a number of them in the Bay Area, and that's what we've been looking at some of those, in order to gain access to more investors and particular equipment or and funding as well. A lot of these incubators will provide funding, and some of them in cash, some of them in the form of a convertible note. Basically, an incubator is a great place to gain a lot more visibility on your small business and to connect with others in the industry. And down at the bottom, there's a link for Bay Area incubators. Okay, then the last thing I want to talk about is the business model canvas, and this is basically part of the Steve Blank philosophy as well. And what this does is it allows you to outline everything that your business is going to do in terms of the nuts and bolts, the ins and outs. And it's great for you to do a sanity check to make sure that you've thought of all of the different components. Has anybody ever seen this before? Well, I'll go through it a little bit. Basically, whoops. Okay, I'll go back to this. Uh-oh. Sorry. I'll just go through it for our business, and that'll probably wrap it up. If you have any questions, just interrupt, please. So key partners for us are our tech transfer office and getting that licensing agreement that I talked about. Foundations can provide seed funding and connections. Then you have your government agencies for your grants and programs. A lot of times, if you get an SBIR, they will also have specific programs designed to help you with more of the commercialization process, obtaining more employees, obtaining more funding, more mentoring. You're going to need your legal for your IP strategy and protection, and your investors. If you can raise money for preclinical testing, that's great. It's difficult, I would say. Okay, so the next is as we're working with the Nebraska Business Development Center. They've given us money. Actually, they give out what are called Phase 0 grants here in Nebraska, and those are basically given to somebody who is starting a business and needs money to get the ball rolling on SBIR grant writing, because Nebraska is an underserved SBIR state. If you look at where all the SBIRs go, they're all going to California pretty much. I mean, they're sprinkled everywhere, but most of them are going to California. So our state of Nebraska is trying to encourage more SBIR grant writing, so you can get money from them. Contract research organizations, and of course pharmaceutical companies will be key partners. Your key activities are you're trying to establish a data set that is going to attract your investors in pharma. You're going to want to use advanced models and tests and animals and figure out by talking to them, you can figure out what data sets they really are the most interested in. You want to do some marketing, of course, your communication and your intellectual property management. Your resources are going to be rental labs, office space. You need to make sure that, especially if you're working at a university, that you're working in a space that will then allow you to secure your own IP. So you need to rent space, use your own equipment, that kind of thing, or at least pay fee for service. You want to make sure that everything that you're doing is going to be attributed to your company. Other key resources are funding and legal expertise. Your value propositions are sort of those are really what's going to drive your data sets, drive who your customers are. And so spending a lot more time on that is definitely useful. And talking to your customers is where you're going to figure out what your value propositions are. So understand the value chain, your direct customers, and your end users. And those are specific to what we're doing. Your customer relationships, your sub-license agreements in this type of business model are key. Direct or indirect marketing, industry conferences, providing support with technical knowledge, potential growth with non-exclusive licensing of the platform for additional applications. And as I said, support letters from customers are very important. Your channels, so these are how are you going to conduct business, and a lot of what you're doing is going to be done virtually through documentation. You may have some material transfer, especially if you're going to try and get into preclinical trials. You need to be able to transport your material across state lines, and then you're going to have to involve regulatory, and that's slightly farther than the stage that I'm talking about now. And then you're also going to have some physical presence at your sub-licensee's location. Can't read this. There we go. Your customer segments, for your sub-licensees, these are particular to us. These are what we're interested in sub-licensing to, or the companies we're interested in sub-licensing to, and products, pharmaceutical companies that have competencies relating to these types of products, pain management, neurological disorders, veterinary care, Botox, and other drug delivery platforms. And then our end users, we want to make sure we're talking to our end users as well, which can guide our research and development. Then in terms of cost structure, there are a lot of fixed costs to deliver this intellectual property value to your sub-licensees. A lot of your costs are driven by this intellectual property value. And then you're going to have your R&D, legal, and if you get to preclinical, you'll have that. Then your revenue streams are basically, you're not going to become profitable until you make your deals with your sub-licensees. So, I mean, you can get support from government agencies and foundations, but those are all to get you to your data set, which will then provide you your upfront license, sub-license fees, milestone payments, and royalties. And that's about all I have. Like, if anybody has any questions, please let them fly. I'm sorry, I missed that. I think it's.
Could you repeat the question or write it on the chat? So I guess we have no questions.
Hey, I have a question. This is Cyrus.
Thanks, Cyrus.
Hey, so Ben, so you currently don't have an agreement with the university for licensing?
We are currently, and it's basically in the lawyer's hands right now. So we have what is called a standstill agreement, and the standstill agreement basically says they're not going to market the technology because they are going to give us an opportunity to develop our business plan.
Okay, so yeah, that was my question: is how much they'd let you do without an official agreement.
Oh, right. So they're working with us. They really want us to start the business. Um, the way that this might work and play out is that since we have the platform, they take the paying application and they take other applications and they also license those. They can find sub licensees. Um, but we're they're behind us 100%. So I'm just sort of I believe our licensing agreement will be signed in the next, hopefully, month, something like that, and then yeah, we'll be good to go on that. But definitely, I would say if you're really serious and you're working at a university, get a standstill agreement because that will signify to them that you're serious about starting the business, and will also um, make sure that they're willing to give you an opportunity to develop the business. And sometimes, if where you're at is if you're at such an early stage of product development and you need additional data sets, the university won't have the resources to develop those additional data sets, and so they really do want the company to come in and perform the research, and then they would then your success in turn becomes their success.
Hey Ben, this is Will. I'm curious about the SBIR process for you. Did you all reach out to program officers ahead of time, and how did those conversations go, if you did? Or I guess how did you come to the SBIR to the point where you got your application in?
Yeah. So with the SBIR, it depends on the agency. If you're doing NSF, they really do encourage you to contact the program director, and there'll be a specific program director for whatever subsection of the SBIR you're or the solicitation that you're applying for. NIH usually you can contact them, but they may not be as communicatory. A great opportunities that we've had a couple times, just there are what are called SBIR roadshows, and what you can do is you can talk to program directors or set up appointments, and you can meet with 3 or 4 of them before you submit your application, and you can ask them questions about the process and that kind of thing. They may or may not have read your quad chart, and that's something we found out. Some of them will have if they're particularly interested in funding the technology. It sort of just depends on what they perceive their needs are for the cycle, and so that's another way to talk to them. But they're very busy people, and they have a lot of companies that are trying to contact them. So sometimes it's difficult to get a hold of them. But we were able to for NSF, and that helped us out a lot. And then you submit and you just wait. So there isn't a lot of contact after the submission.
And in terms of the letters of intent, having gone through the process, how much time would you say is appropriate to budget to actually getting those letters from people that you've been working with?
I'd say I would get those, probably try and get those a month before you're going to try and submit. I wouldn't leave it up to them in the end. I would just constantly be trying to accumulate them. One thing you can do is you can you can write something to them, which basically is going to tell them what it is that you're doing, and a lot of times they will, if they really do believe it and they're trying to save time, because if you're talking to doctors and stuff, they're really busy. Anything you can do in terms of providing them lots of information is good, and so that they can turn around and get that to you. But those are definitely very important. Make it as easy as possible for them. And, hey, Krista, I can't hear you.
Well, it would help if my microphone was on. Can you hear me now? Okay, I mentioned that Hans had said you could buy an option on the IP for a year, sometimes at a modest price. So that was just a chat comment. So thanks very much, Ben, for your presentation. I learned a lot. My husband's all about lean, so I think that's a universal thought, but certainly in this industry and with the startup, it's super important to be as lean as possible. Yeah, I think Ramya Karthikeyan is going to talk about branding at the next. Stay tuned. So again, I'll plug our Facebook alumni page. If you just like us, you'll get lots of notices about things going on. I'm about to get kicked out of this office, so I wish you all very well. Thanks again, Ben, and thank you all for your great questions. Signing on. Bye-bye.